There was a time, not as distant as you might like to think, when the snow crunched beneath the paws of a creature whose shadow made even mammoth bones tremble. It wasn't a wolf, it was the dire wolf, larger, stronger, more feared, the uncrowned king of the Ice Age. But how could such a perfect predator vanish, leaving behind nothing but bone fragments buried in tar and silence? Was he betrayed by the very nature that had shaped him? Or was he the victim of an even deadlier force, one that wore human skin? Georges Cuvier, the father of paleontology, discovered the first pieces of this mystery. But what he uncovered was more than bones. It was a warning, a creature that had everything, and yet did not survive. Now, what if I told you that the same story is unfolding again right before our eyes? But don't answer just yet, because to understand his fate first, you must hear him howl one last time. Imagine a world covered in long shadows, where the sun barely warms the frozen land and the winds roar like angry ancient gods. That was the scene of the Ice Age, the Pleistocene, a glacial opera that lasted more than 2 million years, where life and death danced on the edge of a frozen blade. In that brutal world, where giant bears, cave lions, and woolly mammoths fought for daily breath, a hunter was born who seemed sculpted by the titans of antiquity themselves, the dire wolf, a tough dog. It was not a poetic exaggeration. This wolf was real. It measured up to 1.6 meters long and could weigh more than 70 kilos. Its jaws, wider and more powerful than those of any current wolf, could crush bones with the precision of a hydraulic press. Its body was made to resist and dominate. Shorter but muscular legs, a more robust structure than its modern cousin, the A-wolf dog. He didn't run like a greyhound, but when he caught up with his prey, there was no turning back. It was a sentence. Where did this hairy titan live? From the open prairies of the North American West to the frozen savannas of southern Canada, the terrible wolf ranged across almost the entire continent. From California to Florida, their footprints were left marked in the fossil dust of time. Dwelt plains, open forests, and regions where prey was abundant, and also colossal. American horses, northern camels, ancient bison, and giant sloths were all on the menu, served in portions of raw meat, fear, and desperation. But this predator did not hunt alone. Fossils found in the famous tar pit of La Brea in California show more than 4,000 individuals. Coincidence? Difficult. That suggests social behavior, organized bands, group hunting, a ruthless strategy. Imagine it, a pack of dire wolves stalking at dawn, slowly surrounding an adult bison. It wasn't just about strength, it was about coordination, silent communication, a lethal dance where each bite had its function. They were the Spartans of the animal world, but even Spartans can bleed. And as they howled over the tundra, something was approaching. He didn't run faster, he wasn't stronger, but it had fire and launch, and above all, I had time to observe, time to learn, time to wait for the wolves to make a mistake. How was it possible that such a dominant species began to lose ground? Was it just the weather that pushed them into the abyss? Or was it the arrival of an even more fearsome creature, who walked on 2 legs and wrote his story in other people's blood? But before we reach the end, we must go back. Not everything was glory for the terrible wolf. Each beast has an origin, a wild root that shapes it. Where did this perfect predator come from? How did a beast so different from modern wolves emerge? Evolution doesn't build monsters at random. It chisels them with centuries of battle. And that's where the story that no one told you begins. Sometimes, to understand the end of a creature, we must dig to its foundations, to the mud where it all began. The terrible wolf was not born terrible. It was forged throughout hundreds of thousands of years in the invisible ovens of natural selection. Its lineage dates back to the ancient American canines, descendants of predecessors who migrated from Eurasia more than 10 million years. But he, a tough dog, emerged about 250,000 years, not as any variation, but as a brutal response to the most unforgiving environment imaginable. While grey wolves evolved speed, adaptability, and intelligence in different habitats, the terrible wolf took another path. A more primitive one, a wilder one, chose the body over the cunning, brute force over flexibility, the herd over the individual. It was a beast of perfect balance, neither so fast to chase alone, nor so weak that it needed to hide. Your specialty, hunt impossible prey, in groups for any other terrestrial predator on the continent, and its function was written in its anatomy. Wider jaws, designed to break bones, a more robust skull, with temporal muscles like steel cables, heavier and more compact bones, built to resist impacts and struggles with giants. To understand it better, if the grey wolf is a fast and flexible gorilla, the terrible wolf was a battering ram with fangs, and that worked. It worked for thousands of generations, until he stopped doing it. But we're not there yet. Before his fall, this hunter lived his golden age, a time where gods were made of fang, ice, and thick skin, where the rules were dictated by the predators and not the survivors. In its heyday, a tough dog, he shared his world with titans, the short-faced bear, the American lion, the saber-tooth. It was a time of colossi, an era of biological excess, of enormous biodiversity. The call megafauna, but even among giants, the terrible wolf stood out, not because of size, but because of efficiency. The proof is in La Brea, fossils of entire herds, with signs of struggle, healed fractures, broken teeth that healed. And what does that tell us? That these animals, they lived in community. They took care of their own. They did not abandon the wounded. They weren't killing machines. They were fang societies. A kind of lupine tribe, united not only by instinct, but by an invisible code carved in survival. And in that detail lies the tragedy, because its strength, cooperation, group dependence, extreme specialization, it was the same chain that bound them when the world began to change. The earth began to warm up. The giant prey began to disappear, and with them, the terrible wolf's reason for being, and the humans. They were already there, observing, calculating. Strange hunters who didn't fight like the others. They didn't hunt the weakest, they hunted the strongest. But how exactly did this species, so adapted to combat, become extinct? Was it food shortages, competition with grey wolves, or something much more sinister? And what role did fire, that ancient ally of man, play in the end of this legendary creature? The story takes a dark turn here, one where fangs were no longer enough. There was a time, not so long ago, when every evening in North America rang with bone-shaking howls. But one day, they stopped. And it was not a quick extinction. It was a slow death, silent, almost invisible. As the climate softened after the last glacial maximum a few years ago, 12,000 years, the glaciers retreated, the ecosystems were transformed, and with them, the rules of the game. The terrible wolf, that hunting machine designed for group ambushes of prey weighing several tons, began to find itself in a world that it no longer understood. The frozen grasslands turned into warmer forests. The megatherium, the mammoth, the glyptodont began to disappear. Chance? It wasn't, because along with the ice, another force arrived, more stealthy, more lethal. Us, modern humans. A wise man, they had crossed the Bering Strait, and everywhere we went, the megafauna disappeared. Behind our shadow, one after another, but we didn't use fangs. We didn't have claws, we had spears, we had fire, and above all, we had a strategy. The terrible wolf was not prepared to compete against such a predator. One who I didn't hunt hungry, but with calculation. One that not only killed prey, but eliminated competitors. While gray wolves quickly adapted, changing habitats, hunting smaller animals, forming new hierarchies. He a tough dog I didn't have plan B. It was too specialized, too big, too heavy, too slow. He was like a gladiator left in the middle of a medieval market. Powerful, yes, but useless. And although it was long believed that humans and the terrible wolf hardly interbred, the most recent studies suggest otherwise. We coexist for millennia. And that changes everything. The real tragedy is not that it became extinct, but how it disappeared. Imagine this, a wounded wolf, unable to follow the pack, the ice melting around him, prey getting smaller, faster, more elusive, the grey wolves gaining ground, humans setting forests on fire to attract deer, and he, the giant hunter, reduced to the shadow of what he was. The La Brea tar trap keeps their skeletons, but he can't tell his thoughts. He cannot show us the fear in his last eyes. We can only guess. And that's what hurts, because we are more like them than we would like to admit. We are also pack creatures. We also need to belong. And when the world changes too quickly, we feel lost too. Therefore, each bone of the terrible wolf found in those black traps speaks to us, not just from a predator that disappeared, but of a way of life that no longer has a place. But did everything really disappear from him? Or perhaps he left something buried in our unconscious? An echo, a memory, an archetype. Because here comes the most disturbing question of all. If the dire wolf, it wasn't a monster from the past, but a mirror of our own present. Paris, 1804. In a room barely illuminated by the dim light of a chandelier, a man leans his head over a fossilized bone. The silence is total, except for the occasional rustle of his pen on paper. His name is Georges Cuvier. And although he doesn't know it at the time, he is about to forever change our way of understanding life, death, and time. Cuvier was not a dreamer. He was a surgeon from the past, the father of the comparative paleontology, the man who proved that worlds existed prior to ours and that they disappeared without leaving heirs. Among the fossils he studied, one caught his attention due to its size, robustness, and ferocity, a skull that seemed to belong to a wolf. But not just any wolf. It was too big, too wide, too other. Thus was born the first scientific classification of a tough dog, the dire wolf, and with it, a then revolutionary idea that the species they were not eternal, that extinction was real, and that nature did not always reward strength. Cuvier looked at fossils as if they were corpses of fallen empires. Each bone, a document. Each vertebra, a testimony. Each fang, a warning. But there was something else. Cuvier did not only look to the past, it also held up a mirror to the future. His work would inspire generations of naturalists, explorers, and scientists who, century after century, would search for the remains of a lost world, while ours began to show signs of its own fragility. Today, thanks to techniques such as fossil DNA extraction, He-3D bone scan, and artificial intelligence simulations, we know more about the terrible wolf than ever before. We know that its bite was one of the most powerful of all canids. We know that his skeleton was adapted for endurance, not speed. We know that it lived in a pack, but not like today's wolves. Their hierarchies were probably more stable, their ties more rigid, almost military. And the most disturbing thing, we know he wasn't that far from the grey wolf. Genetically they were cousins, but functionally they were rivals. The grey wolf survived because it was flexible. The terrible wolf fell because he was loyal to his design, a lesson, if we want to read it. Because in a world that changes faster than ever, what weighs more, strength or the ability to transform? Today, scientists even speculate with the idea of, I will resurrect Canis dirus through genetic editing techniques. Use DNA recovered from fossils to implant it in current species. Create a hybrid, return it to Earth. But here an ethical dilemma arises. Can we bring back something that has no space in the present? Or would we just create a creature with no time, no function, no destiny? Perhaps, as Cuvier once said with scientific coldness, the past does not revive, it only instructs us. And yet, something in us still want to relive it. Because the terrible wolf is not just a fossil, it is a symbol of what we were, of what we feared, of what perhaps we still are. And if you listen carefully, in the darkest nights, in the depths of your dreams, you may still hear it howl. But before we bring him back, are we sure the modern world can survive its return? The terrible wolf disappeared more than 10,000 years ago, but his shadow is still with us. In video games, series, novels, and nightmares, his figure has become an archetype, the relentless predator, the ice warrior, the spirit of a forgotten era. But it wasn't a monster. He was a victim of a world that changed without asking permission, from a climate that stopped forgiving, and from a recently arrived species, ours, that did not share the territory well. Today, its history forces us to look back, to understand what may come. Because if a wolf so strong, so adapted, so dominant, could disappear in silence, what makes us think we are safe? Extinction is not an event, it's a mirror. And sometimes, looking back, what we really discover is ourselves.